This morning, we're going to be talking about another of the key words of the Bible. And as I mentioned to you, we're going to be talking about submission, what it means to submit, because this is a very important word. Those of you who've been in studying the Bible over the years probably have a pretty good idea of this, but it might be interesting to you to go back to the original word and see what it means. Remember this as we kind of start out. The main source of sin is pride, according to the Bible. And I think when you get right down to it, you look at all the problems we've got, it's because of people's pride, their desire to control someone else, their desire to manipulate other people. In other words, pride is the source of sin. And the Bible tells us the solution to this problem of pride is submission. Another way of saying it, we have to somehow get control of the pride, and by ourselves, we just cannot do it. And we as Christians, everyone listening to me this morning, you know that we have no ability to completely control our pride. And therefore, we need help, and we turn to our Lord for that. And He's given us some very good examples. He's given us some wonderful stories. He gave us a life of modeling what it means to be submissive. And unfortunately, in our day and in an earlier day, this whole idea of being submissive has changed. And somehow many of us have accepted the popular non-biblical way of understanding submission. In fact, I bet if I asked, most of you probably when you look at people who use the word submit, they're using it in a very negative, very controlling, domineering way. But I want to give you a picture just to begin with before we have some scriptures read. I want to give you a picture of submission. Jesus gave us this picture. And to do it, I want to hold up something here to the screen. Can you see this all right? This is a little wood carving that Phyllis's father, Buddy, did for Phyllis and me when we got married. He did it kind of as a joke. He brought in and says, "I've got your wedding gift." A picture, of course, of an ox yoke. And these collars are, of course, where the ox put their heads. And the cross in the middle was a symbol of the idea this is going to be a Christian marriage where the two of you are yoked together to serve Christ. I thought it was a great gift for a wedding, don't you? Well, but what the surprise was is that he didn't just make a little tiny, 8-inch one. He made one that was the actual size of the original ox yoke. It was 6 feet long, and it had these huge collars. And he brought it in later, and we've loved it all these years. After we got married, we put it on the mantle. In fact, I've got a picture of one I want to show you. We put it on the mantle of our home in San Antonio. Can you see that?
Oh, wow.
That thing is the original size of an ox, and Buddy made that thing, hand carved that thing, and we've kept it all these years as a symbol of what our marriage should really be like. When Jesus said, you remember in Matthew, he said, "My Father has given me all authority, all power. I can do anything I want to." But he says that he took on the form of a servant. And Jesus said, if you have a burden, if you have a heavy burden, what did he say to do? Take my yoke on you, learn the way I do things, and you'll find rest. He said, get under my yoke, because my yoke is easy, it's smooth, it's gentle, and it'll work. The picture is, get this now, the picture that Jesus has given, and it's been used in weddings all around the world in all kinds of cultures. It's the picture of this yoke. And what Jesus was saying is, I'm offering you, if you're going to be a Christian, I'm offering you to get under my yoke, put your head in this side over here and bear the burden of this yoke. And I'll put my head in here, and together we will carry people. We will carry loads. We will do great things because together we can get a lot done. I am so powerful. I could do this alone, but I'm going to let you learn how to live properly by taking this yoke upon you. What a beautiful picture of submission, isn't it? Think of that. Jesus is saying, let's share one another. Let's lift one another up. Let's care one. Let's not just do this alone. So I want us to hear just a few scriptures that highlight this idea of submission. And then we're going to see how it works, the original word, how it contrasts to our contemporary. And then we're also going to see how we can apply this to our daily lives as Christians, because it's very important. You can mark it down. If you don't learn how to be submissive in every area of your life, what will happen is your pride will take over. And I know there's nobody here that struggles with pride, is there? That was a joke. If you didn't laugh, you got problems. Okay. This word submission, I think, let's just be honest, we live in a day where the word submission has been stained. And if you ask the average person, I went online and just sort of take a look at what is the American view of submission. And it's no surprise that even Webster's dictionary says that submission is coming under the authority or control of another person. In other words, the view that has been bought of this word submit or submission is the idea that somebody else dominates you, somebody else is over you, and you give in, you lose control, you lose respect, and you have to come under somebody else's control and authority. This is the American view, and it's not just America. We've been tainted, we have been confused and misled by other cultures, especially pagan cultures such as those involved in Islam, especially the radical forms of Islam and the laws that they use. This is the idea that certain people, like man, is more important than woman, that power is more important than anything. And so in other cultures, the male-dominated cultures, especially in primitive cultures where just sheer strength was the one who ruled, men have used this idea of submission to dominate women and children and to use them for whatever they want. We fight this in the Sharia law that's now being faced across the world with the dominance of radical Islam. We also see it in other religions. And unfortunately, we see it in Christianity. It was during the Roman period, if you remember, Christians were pressured by the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire had this idea of submission, of being the kind of thing where you submit yourself to your master, because there was a caste system, as it is in Hinduism, as it is in Buddhism, as it is in Islam, as it is in radical Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity. It was the idea that those who have money and those who have strength should be able to get the other people, the weak and the poor, to serve them. And so you have these caste systems, these class systems, these stratas, and those who have power say that it's God's will that you who do not hold power serve. You were born to serve others. And so this view of this dominance became part of the culture and therefore seeped into the religion. So even the Christian faith during what we call the Dark Ages, often called the Golden Ages of Christianity, was a period where people who were poor and weak or female were treated as less than and had no rights and no respect. It's a dark time in our history that we must confess and ask for forgiveness, but we must not let it dominate us today. It still lingers in some Christian camps, in some cults, and in some forms of Christian denominations, where the whole idea of a man has more value. I remember Phyllis's famous statement when she was in seminary, and a man said, well, the women ought to be submissive to men. Women ought to be submissive to men. And Phyllis said, why is that? He said, because man was created first. And she said, oh, well, it's my understanding that a jackass was created before a man. So Phyllis can get tough. I'm telling you, I got the wounds to prove it. But anyway, the truth of it is, the Bible has a very different view of submission. The Webster's Dictionary view is wrong, and it's painfully and hurtfully wrong, because it was picked up by the Romans and the Latin translation. When the Romans had such influence, and later the British had such influence, when the Bible was translated from the Old Testament and then the New Testament, translated into Latin, they chose a word that was unfortunate. They chose the Latin word, which was submissionian. Another way of saying submission, neem. What that said was submission means to come under another person's authority. So they use the idea to justify the Roman view that submission in the Bible refers to the fact that you should give up your rights and let somebody else have a role over you. It became a military term, where if you were a private, you must do what the general says, even if the general's wrong. In other words, there was nothing more than just a system of stratus. Now let's take a view of what the Bible's talking about, and especially what is Jesus talking about when it talks about submission in the Bible. How are you as a Christian to read this, and how are you to practice this in your daily life?
The original Hebrew word, which was rapos, or without the vowels, is RPSH, was a pictogram that showed the person's head, and it was a symbol of a mission, a goal, something someone's trying to reach. The P was a picture of a mouth that symbolized a commitment, and the SH was the picture of the front teeth, or something that looks like it's on fire. It's the idea of being passionate about something. So when you put those together, you come up with the idea of something that's passionately committed to some mission. It's the idea of going for it, getting under and making it happen.
To kneel down underneath someone who's hurt, kind of like somebody who's been knocked off and thrown in a ditch, and you're riding along like the Good Samaritan, and you see this person in the ditch, and you say, they need help. So you get off and you get down under, you pick them up and carry them to get help. That's submission. It was the whole idea of encouragement, the whole idea of uplifting. That was the whole idea of submission. And so whenever we submit, it's not losing power, it's choosing to use your power to help someone else. That's when Jesus said, take my yoke upon you. He was going back to that original idea of submission means to choose. I give you a choice. If you want to have a good life, you want to be successful in overcoming the problems of this world, here's what you do. You choose to come with me and let's be helpers. Let's lift up other. Let's give our lives for something worthwhile. Let's have a noble purpose. So the whole idea of submission is not losing anything. The whole idea is using what you've got, making a good choice. When the word was translated into Greek, the good news is the New Testament writers, as we all know, all of the New Testament writers were Jews, except for Luke. And all of them knew the history of the word submission. So when they used the term submit, for instance, it says, submit yourself to the Lord. When it says that Jesus submitted himself and he left, he could have done anything he wanted. He had the power of God, and yet he was God himself, and yet he submitted himself even to the cross. When it's talking about submitting, it's not talking about giving up. Jesus is not saying to give up. Jesus was saying, I chose to use my power to use my influence, to be a helper, to be a lifter, to be an encourager. And so the Greek word, interesting enough, is a word pronounced hupotasso. It's two words. Hupo is a word that means to place under, to put something underneath or to get under. And the word passo, which is a word that means task or mission. If you have a task, if you have a mission, hupo means to get under that mission or to get under someone who has a mission, a task. So you look at someone and you say, this person has a task, this person has a burden, this person has a need, or this person has a opportunity that God has given them. I'm going to choose to get under them and to help be a part of the yoke that they're carrying. And we're going to work together to make this work. That's what submission means. Do you know where the word submission was first used in the Bible? You're not going to be surprised. It was first used with the concept of a Hebrew marriage, of a godly marriage. It was the idea, here is a single man, for instance, who says, I'm living for myself, take care of myself, everything I make, I use for myself. Now I'm going to do what? I'm going to be yoked with another person. We're both going to have the same yoke. We're both going to work together. And we're going to not care more about ourselves than with the other. In fact, we're going to change things. I'm going to stop caring just about myself, and I'm going to care more about you. And together, we're going to make this work. Is it surprising that Paul, who was a Jewish scholar, when he wrote the letter to the Philippians, what did Paul say? Paul said about marriage, he said, in fact, this is a scripture Phyllis and I used in our wedding. He said, you're going to stop living for yourself and think more of the other than you do yourself. That's true submission. Picking up that Old Testament idea that submission is when two people decide that they're not going to live for themselves. They're going to care more about the other than they do themselves. And everyone listening to me, you could be a testimony to that, isn't it? Those who really have love, those who really have true Christian love, we are people who've decided that what's more important than our prideful self is the other. And we're going to do every we can to lift them up and to do the best for them, help them reach their potential. So this whole idea of husbands, submit yourself to your wives, wives, submit to yourself to your husband, that's nothing new to us as Christians and Jews. So what are we saying here for us to remember when we read the Bible? The whole idea of submission is the idea of being encouragers, being being those who lift other people up. When I think about Jesus, he's our model in everything. And here's the great scripture, of course, that has been throughout all history in all languages to follow Christ. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He surrendered them. He put them underneath. And here's what it says. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. He went down under. He used his power not for himself. And it says, listen to this. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience and died the criminal's death on the cross. Jesus gave himself. That is the perfect picture of humility. I want you to picture this person. Her name is Sonia. She's poor, abandoned, Afro-American girl. She grew up just before the Depression, was born in 1929. And as just a baby, she was part of a family, unfortunately, a very poor family, 24 brothers and sisters. She was living in the ghetto, and she was passed from one foster home to another throughout her life. And along the way, as a teenager, she met another kid who was in foster care. They ran away and got married when they were teenagers. She quickly got pregnant, had 2 children, and her husband unfaithfully left her, deserted her. She had no education. She had no work experience. She was left holding these 2 children and decided, because of her bad experience in the government system, that she would not abandon her children. she would do whatever she had to. So she took jobs, sometimes 3 jobs at one time, just to support her children and find a way of living. As the years went on, Sonia raised those 2 boys, and it was hard because when they went to school, they tell the story now, they didn't feel right. They felt different. They felt poor. They didn't have proper clothes. They didn't have glasses that they needed. They didn't have a lot of things, but their mother kept telling them, we can make it. Let's work together. The boys got in fights in school. They had a lot of trouble with discipline, but she kept on. And then one day, they graduated. Now let's fast forward to 2021. All these years later, she faithfully served those boys. And now, if you were to read about her 2 sons today, you may not remember her first son, the older son. His name is his name is Curtis. Curtis became a nationally recognized aeronautical engineer. He stayed by his mother's side until she was 88 years old and took care of her because she was his life and his hope. And he's now a very famous aeronautical engineer. The name you would remember is Dr. Ben Carson, the world-renowned neurosurgeon. And you remember that he was the first neurosurgeon to separate Siamese twins who were joined at the back of the head, one of the most remarkable surgeries in the history of medicine. He then later became the head of the neurological department at Johns Hopkins, the most respected neurology department in America. He was the youngest chief of pediatric neurosurgeon in the country. He went on, as some of you know, to become the U.S. Department Housing and Urban Development Secretary. And as some of you know, it was very hard. He felt like he was a failure because of the political fighting, that he couldn't get anything hardly passed to help poor people. That was his main job, poor and underprivileged people. But you know what he did? He decided to start his own foundation. He started the Carson Scholarship Fund. This boy, who grew up almost as poor as you could possibly be, now is the head of a foundation. This year, he has given away over 10,000 full scholarships to deserving students who are poor or underprivileged and not able to take care of themselves. 10,000 scholarships. He's been respected around the world, has received 66 doctor's degrees, honorary doctor's degrees. How did all that happen? If you read his book, Gifted Hands, which Phyllis and I have read, it's a tremendous book. Here's what he said. Listen to this closely. If anyone had a reason to make excuses, it was my mom. But she absolutely refused to be a victim and would not permit us to develop the victim mentality. He went on to say, I owe everything to my mom. I would say that this woman, Sonia Carson, is a modern picture of submission. You know, you don't have to be the mother of a fellow who's that famous to be submissive. We've got people who are submissive in our own class as brothers and sisters in Christ. I want us to take a few minutes and I want you to think, who do you know in our class or somebody you know personally who has demonstrated Christ-like submission? Because that's what we're to be. Whether it's being submissive to authorities, being submissive to our own husband or wife. What does it mean to be submissive? I'd like you to this morning be an encourager. Can you think of somebody in our class or somebody you know that has demonstrated in their life lifting up, encouraging, helping, giving them, choosing to give of their strength to help somebody? I want to mention one as just an example. And I can do that because he's not on the He's not on the Zoom this morning. They're traveling. But Chris Buckingham is a friend of ours. As you know, he's a friend of all of you. Chris has now for years taken under his wing a young boy named Anthony. And every week, sometimes more than a week, he has become his friend because he hasn't had a dad. And Chris has encouraged that boy. And I've met him. I met him years ago and I met him again now. And he's transformed his life. You know, it's taken a lot of time. It's taken a lot of hard knocks, a lot of setbacks. But that boy, his life will be changed forever. Chris is another Sonia, and he's in our class. I call that true Christ-like submission, and I want to applaud him, and I want to encourage all of us to be more like Chris. I hope this lesson has helped you, and as you think about it, you know, this is a time when we really need to be encouragers, because one of the big themes of all the speakers, bloggers, writers, is that we're living in a very depressing time for many people. But for us as Christians, we know there is hope and there is light, and we're part of that. Thank you this morning, and hope you have a wonderful week, and may God bless you.